So we will have quite a few people watch this webinar in posterity. I guess we've got a few double bookings tonight as training has sort of started again. So the numbers might not look as exciting as many people will actually see this. So yeah, so we've got Dawn Bourbonnais from Volunteer Manitoba to come and give us a really basic rundown on, I guess, an intro to volunteer management. What I ask of anybody that is on the webinar and anybody that happens to watch this in the future is to part of the follow-up for this is that we're looking to offer some volunteer management training to anyone that's involved with rugby clubs or PSOs across the prairies. So if this is something that does interest you, please get in touch with the provincial reps and we'll make something happen in the next sort of month and a bit, because as we were sort of just talking about earlier, we're all in the volunteer management game. It's just that rugby is the sort of the cover, the sport is the reason, but it's volunteer management. So excellent. Without further ado, thank you very much, Dawn. I'll hand it over to you.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, I think so.
Perfect. Let me just hold on 1 second. There we go. How's that? The screen is good? Okay. If anybody has any questions or if I freeze or something wacky happens, apparently Andrew is in charge, so you can let him know and he'll fix it. So thanks for having me here tonight. I know we're going to blast through this really quick because somebody else is coming on right after me, so you got a double header today. And also it's a big subject matter to put into 1 hour. So I'm kind of going to give you the highlights of volunteer engagement, talk about some of the bigger pieces, recruiting, retaining, and recognizing your volunteers. There is a lot more to it, but we just don't have the time tonight to go through everything. But, as mentioned earlier, if you're looking for further training or you want to go, dive deeper into any of this material, reach out to us afterwards, because Volunteer Manitoba, we do a lot of volunteer management training and we work with a lot of volunteer programs right across the province here. And so we are hopefully experts by now at working with volunteers. So without further ado, let me get started with my presentation. A little bit about me, just so you know who I am and why I'm here tonight. I am the Manager of Communications and Outreach at Volunteer Manitoba. I've been with VM for almost 10 years now, and I oversee our outreach and our referral programs. So a lot of what I do every day is helping people find places to volunteer, opportunities to give back, and working with volunteer programs and organizations to engage volunteers effectively and successfully. I also sit on the board of the Volunteer Management Professionals of Canada and Volunteer Canada's Council of National Volunteer Centres. So that's where hopefully I get a lot of my experience and know-how from. Just really quick overview about Volunteer Manitoba for those of you who might not know. We do a lot more than just help people volunteer. We do a lot of community outreach. We present a lot, like tonight, on how to engage volunteers, work with volunteers, how to get involved yourself, what volunteering looks like, who's doing the most kind of volunteering, what's been happening during the pandemic, all of that fun stuff. We refer people to places to volunteer, and we also have a Board Connect program where we try and match people with those leadership positions on boards and committees and get people involved at that level, because we know that's a challenge sometimes. We have our training, which you're a part of tonight. We also do workshops. Hopefully soon, I think in the next little while, we're going to be exploring going back to in-person training. I've been doing a lot of Zoom training the last 2 years, and it's been a fun ride, but I'm coming to the end of my need to be on Zoom all the time. So I'm looking forward to everything opening back up and we can get back to work safely and, comfortably. And then we also have our youth program where we work with young kids to get them involved in volunteering. And then we celebrate volunteers every year with our annual volunteer awards. So I can now tell my boss that I did our promo part of this presentation and I'm good to go. So tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about the Canadian Code for Volunteer Involvement and what that is and why it's important. We're going to talk about volunteer recruitment, which is everybody's biggest challenge. And it's been the biggest challenge for volunteer programs. I think we're going on 7-8 years. It's always the #1 problem everybody has. So everybody wants to learn a lot about that. So I tried to put enough of that in here for you to get started. We'll talk a little bit about what volunteers' needs and interests are, very broadly though. We're not going to get too specific tonight because we don't have time. And then we're going to go into volunteer retention and recognition. So we're going to cover what I call the big 3 R's: recruitment, retention, and recognition. And if there's any questions, I've built in a little bit of time at the end for all of you folks. So let's start with the code. The foundation, I really do believe this, and I've been following the code for a long time, even before I worked at Volunteer Manitoba when I managed volunteers for festivals and events. I do believe that the foundation of every successful volunteer program, regardless of size, is the Canadian Code for Volunteer Involvement. And so if you're not familiar with it, the code, or the CCVI, as some of us like to refer to it, is a framework for involving volunteers in all levels of your organization. So this includes volunteers who are working in leadership positions, volunteers who are providing direct service to folks, and any virtual roles that you might have developed or that you offer people, especially during the last couple of years. It's meant to be flexible, and it applies to all organizations regardless of your size, with different levels of resources. So if some people have a big budget, some people have staff that can run their volunteer program. Some of us do it off the side of our desks, and some of us are doing it as volunteers ourselves. All of that works with the code. And whether you're coming from a small community or large urban center, the code should apply for you as well. So it really was created by Volunteer Canada in collaboration with volunteer managers to provide a one-size-fits-all resource for volunteer programs. There are 3 core elements to the code. The first element is the value of volunteer involvement. And it breaks down why volunteers are valuable in our society and why we need them and should encourage people to continue volunteering. It also covers the guiding principles which frame the relationship between the volunteer and the organization or the group that is using their time to help them get their programs and services running. And then what my favorite, because this is what we teach in volunteer management training, the standards of practice. So these are for involving individuals in meaningful ways and ensuring that your programs are successful, that you're achieving what it is you're trying to achieve with the help of volunteers. There are 10 standards, not going to go into them tonight, but we do cover each of them in more detail in our other workshops. We have 3-hour, 6-hour, and 3-day workshops all on volunteer management. So check out our website or contact, I think Patrick, you were talking with Camila, my coworker, so maybe through your local affiliate or whatever, you can figure out how to access our training, and we'll go from there. Why is the code important? Well, I really do believe, because I've seen it done a million ways, that using a planned approach to identify volunteer roles that are needed within your organization or your group, and helping those volunteers help you achieve your mission, that you're able to engage people's talents and skills better. And you can increase your organizational capacity as well through targeted recruitment and making sure that you're getting the right people to do the right job. You're not just filling spots with free labor, because that's not what volunteers exist for, right? I always like to tell people when I do volunteer management to remember that every time a volunteer approaches you, they're about to give you a gift. It's a donation of their time. It's no different than a check or a charitable donation, and we need to look at it like that. So following the code and having a program set up in order to meet that gift is just going to ensure success in the long run. So that's why it's important for us to adopt the code in our organization. And I also think that adopting the code signals to volunteers that you're committed to strengthening your volunteer program and you're taking this seriously. And you do know that it's a gift of time that people are giving you. And all of that will contribute to strong and connected communities, and it's going to make your volunteer program successful. So that is my spiel on the code. Now we will move on to volunteer recruitment. Volunteer recruitment is a broad topic that covers a lot of different things, but really at the heart of it, we're going to talk about that tonight, is it's taking everything that you know about the role that your volunteer has and selling it to people who might not know they're interested yet. That's how I look at volunteer recruitment. In order to sell that role, you need to understand what people are looking for, what they're motivated when it comes to giving back their time, or what motivates them when it comes to giving back their time. And then you have to figure out a way to convince them that your time slot, your program, your service that you're providing to your community is worth that donation of their time, because there is a lot of competition out there. And a lot of people are being more choosy with how they donate their time. So the more organized you are and the more prepared you are to meet that need, the better off you're going to be with your recruitment. So before we get into sort of people's motivations and needs, let's talk a little bit about recruitment and marketing and how the two of those things go together. I'm sure you're all aware that marketing is, at its core, selling or promoting a product or service. And in order to ensure as many people as possible are interested in that product or service, marketers do a lot of research on motivations, demographics, lots of different sort of best practices out there that marketers can get into in order to figure out the best tactics to apply to that audience to sell their products and services. Recruitment is not that different. It's basically announcing the need for volunteer assistance in order to help you accomplish your mission or achieve your vision or your goal or whatever it is you set out to do. And it's identifying and promoting the various tasks and roles that are needed in order to fill that need. So how they're going to, and also how those different roles might appeal to different people in their life cycle as well. So that's how marketing and recruitment tie together. What we like to talk about at Volunteer Manitoba is how to take the 5 P's of marketing, which jokingly we often say is please, 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 please help me out. But it's not, it's a little bit more intricate than that. But applying these basic marketing principles to your recruitment strategies will help you kind of hone in on your messaging and figure out what exactly it is you're doing with your recruitment. Some of the things you consider are your products. So your product in this case is the role that you need to fill. So what's the job that you're asking a volunteer to do for you? And what does that look like? How does it tie back to what it is you do as an organization? A lot of people, when they're looking for volunteer roles, want to make an impact. Regardless of how big that impact is, they want to make a difference. They're giving you their time. So this is a good point in that connection with a potential volunteer to talk about, we need volunteer coaches. Why do we need volunteer coaches? Well, because we can't run our programs without volunteer coaches. Like all these kids would have nowhere to go play rugby if we didn't, really sell the reason what would happen if you didn't fill that role. The place. So people are looking for variety. A lot of organizations will just put, we're looking for somebody to help us out. That doesn't really tell me anything, right? I want to know, is this long-term? Is this short-term? Is this just on weekends? Is this, is this an opportunity to be, with a group of people? Is this a solo expedition? Is this virtual? All of those things, especially now, are a little bit more, people are a little bit more picky right now as we're coming out of, I keep saying we're coming out of the pandemic because I have a lot of optimism, you see. I think we're there. But you want to talk about, how people are looking. So the place is the how, it's the what. It's what is this? How does this role tie back into? And you want to incorporate that information into your recruitment. When we talk about price, obviously you're not paying somebody for their time, then they'd be an employee. But you want to think about, what does a volunteer have to invest themselves into this position, into this product that you're trying to sell them? What, time is obviously the first thing people think about. Is this going to be a big commitment of my time? Is this a short commitment of my time? I'm probably not going to surprise you when I say people want to make short-term commitments, but that does not mean they won't stay with you for a long period of time. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into motivations. But I think it's important to when you're talking in your recruitment, to sort of list the hard and soft costs of volunteering. If when I worked the Jazz Festival for years, we knew every summer that parking was going to be an issue and we couldn't provide parking to volunteers. We made that clear right up at the hop, right from the get-go, that parking is kind of on your own. And then that kind of weeds out people who really want a parking spot or they're not going to show up, right? So you want to think about all the things that, if I don't say this now and it becomes an issue later, are they gonna walk away from this opportunity? So, you know, take some time and list all that stuff out. And then what are the benefits of engaging volunteers in this role? This is where you get a chance to talk about the impact that volunteers will have in your organization and the difference that they can make in their community. And then finally, you want to identify potential target markets, and you want to remember that one size does not fit all when it comes to recruitment. If you want certain people to show up at the table, you need to go out and find them, and you need to create messaging that appeals to that group of people that you want at the table. It doesn't all work for everybody the same way. But this is also a really good opportunity for you to think creatively and reach out to groups that you might not have reached out to before, right? Volunteer recruitment should be, well, I like to say it's an easy sell, but I know how hard it is. It's also very strategic. When you have a solid understanding of what motivates people to volunteer, and again, we'll get into that in a second, and you set up your role to fill that interest, to show people that this is why your time is going to be a benefit to our organization, then you will be successful in your recruitment strategy. My tips for people at this point are, remember to brainstorm with your team and others to think about different ways you can reach out to people. We don't live in silos, and it's really important to open up that field and make sure that everybody has an opportunity to participate in that conversation. Have fun with your recruitment. Don't make it so. I see a lot of people that just write like a job description and they post it on their website and they go, okay, well, how come nobody's applying for my position? Well, that's not really that exciting, right? Like, you got to think, what would appeal to you if you wanted to donate your time to somebody? You know, everyone's just as choosy as you are. So think about it that way. And then, you know, also tailor your messaging. So we talked about that. Remember to really showcase your good news stories and who you are as an organization. Make sure your website is up to date. Make sure your social media is up to date if you do have that. People are going to go and research you if they see your recruitment message. And if they see something and they're hooked and they go look further and there's nothing, it's a blank wall of information and I don't know who to contact or what I'm looking for, then they walk away and they'll find somebody else. There's always an opportunity for somebody to go, my time is better served elsewhere, right? We're very picky with our time, and can you blame us? You know, so yeah, that's my big thing. It's a donation, it's a gift. The next thing you want to do with recruitment is make sure that you've clarified the work that needs to be done. Don't just recruit for recruitment's sake. When you're recruiting for a volunteer position, you need to be very clear about what the job entails and what you're asking somebody to do for you. If you're not clear and your messaging is too general, then you're not going to find somebody who's going to fit the position. And if you do, they might not stick around for a long time. Remember too, we're not going to talk a lot about screening and risk management here, but recruitment and your recruitment messaging is a method of screening people out. It's allowing people to self-select whether or not they'd be suitable for that position. So that's why you want to think about it that way. People are more likely to contribute their time when they know what they will be doing. So the more general you are, the less likely you are to get a wide pool of people. Recruiting volunteers will be easier if you have job descriptions as your starting point. And I still to this day, I'm really surprised at how few people take time to craft a job description. I think we have this sense that volunteerism isn't as formal as employment. So why would I go to all the same lengths I would for an employed position, creating a job description, having, an interview, reference checks, all of that kind of thing, if it's a volunteer position? Well, that's exactly why you should take this just as seriously as you would an employer or an employee. A clearly defined job description will not only help you attract the right person, it's also going to help you manage and support your volunteers and improve their performance as they journey along with you, hopefully for a long period of time. Both you as the person supervising volunteers, recruiting volunteers, managing volunteers, whatever that looks like, and volunteers themselves need to know what's expected of them. To do otherwise is like driving a car without a steering wheel. And I haven't done that, but I'm sure it's not going to work out well for anybody. A job description might seem overly formal, like I mentioned, but it's just as important as it is for paid staff, because everyone in your organization then has a clearly defined role, and it prevents any crossover, any miscommunication, any confusion as to what I need to accomplish when I show up for my shift, all of that fun stuff. It also directly contributes to your mission. You exist for a reason, right? Your rugby club, your organization, you exist because there's a reason for that. You're accomplishing something. You have a mission. You have a vision. You need to have tasks assigned to people, whether they're paid or volunteering, that accomplish that mission, and job descriptions will help you do that. Also remember that volunteers come with different motivations and choices. They can pass on your position at any time, so you need to remember to always think about what motivated them to approach you and provide as much information as you can so they can make the decision to volunteer for you. This is often when I'm doing this training where people will be like, well, nobody's ever designed a job description for me. I don't have a template. Like, I don't even know where to start. We have a lot of templates at Volunteer Manitoba. We'd be happy to share. You can Google a volunteer job description and you'll get lots of different examples. I wouldn't overthink it. I would just make sure that you have something, because if you have nothing, people are walking away from that and they're looking for it elsewhere. Some things that you can include in your job description, obviously a job title, that's important. The term volunteer is not just a job description. I recommend that you either say volunteer coach or volunteer admin assistant or volunteer, like follow it up with something, because the volunteering is what they're doing, but it doesn't necessarily speak to the job that they're holding or the task that they have to accomplish. On the same token, I wouldn't get too creative or too nutty about it, because that might confuse people. So you want to try and stay clear. Depending on the style of your organization, if you're funny, or somebody in your organization is funny and you can come up with a punny title, those are sometimes cute. It just depends on what your own style is and what your own voice is like. If you're not like that on a regular basis, don't try it here for the first time because it might not go over well, but it's not a bad thing if you do use it. My point here is just to make sure that if I am looking for a volunteer position and I see your job title, is it hooking me? Is it in, like, what is that? You know what I mean? The word volunteer is very generic. You also want to make sure, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, that you take the opportunity to put the purpose of this role. Why is it this person is being asked to donate their time to help you achieve this role or this goal or whatever it is you're doing here? Duties and responsibilities. This is really important to potential volunteers. This is where people are going to decide whether or not they can accomplish all those duties and responsibilities, and they can do it in the time frame that you've asked them to donate. So this is where you want to be clear about what's expected. Sorry, I'm going to take a sip of water. I'm talking too fast. You're going to be clear about what's expected and list each duty and responsibility, but you don't want to like overkill, you know what I mean? So you can play around with that a little bit. Whether or not there are specific skills or qualifications that you're looking for. You know, if you want somebody to be knowledgeable in something or have a background in something, this is where it's really important to list that. Any orientation or training that's required. What are some of the volunteer benefits? Hold on one second. Sorry about that. Holy, that came on fast. You can tell it's been a while since I have to talk that much to people. So apologies for that. Anyway, where was I? So we were talking about listing skills and qualifications. If there's any kind of orientation or training they have to participate in, this is where you want to list it. Obviously, the commitment required, working conditions, etc. So like I mentioned, we have templates. I can't remember off the top of my head if they're available on our website right off the bat, or if you have to email one of us to ask. You can always email myself directly and I'm happy to share one. Or again, you can reach out to our training manager, Camila, and she can send that to you as well. So that's enough about job descriptions and me losing my voice. Now let's move on to some recruitment techniques. like I've mentioned already, you should be using your website to highlight the type of volunteer work that you're needing and how people can reach out to you to apply for that. Social media is also an excellent place to be sharing information on volunteering. E-billboards, if you're, tied into your community, or if your own network has a way of sharing information, that's really good as well. Community outreach, we do a lot of that. This tends to happen a lot at the high school and post-secondary level as well. So if you're recruiting volunteers from those age groups, there's lots of community outreach through the high schools and post-secondary, and I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Usually it's happening a lot in September, and then there's another wave that usually happens in the spring leading into summer. So those are really good times to get out into the community. Again, once we open back up again and everybody's comfortable getting back into the swing of things. You can approach the media. My one tip for approaching the media about needing volunteers is the media is going to be looking for a story to go with that. So what I find really works well is highlighting a volunteer who's already part of your program or a success story that you have, and then that naturally leads into an interest to get involved with you. If you follow the Winnipeg Free Press, every Monday they do a volunteer feature, and running alongside of it is a list of volunteer opportunities that we provide them. So sometimes we work with the Free Press to let them know, there's this really interesting program that's going on, and this one volunteer had this really cool thing happen to them, and you should go check it out, and so on and so forth. So that's a really good place to go. Also right now, we talked about it a little bit at the beginning when we mentioned Ukraine, but right now the media is really looking for feel-good stuff. So if there's anything that's not, serious or like going on globally that they don't have to focus on, then they're really thrilled to highlight what's going on in our communities, because there is really good things happening at the community level. It's not all doom and gloom. I think it just feels that way because we're so connected, but that's the good part of my job. I get to hear about the good stuff every day. You can also recruit your friends and family. Word of advice, be careful about this. I myself have done it, so no judgment, but I tend to find that either I burn out my friends and family, or they leave when I leave. So that doesn't really help the organization maintain a long-term volunteer, right? So you want to be careful when you're leaning on your friends and family too often. You just want to be careful of that. And then of course, reach out to your local volunteer center. For those of you here in Manitoba, that is us, Volunteer Manitoba. I know some of you might be tuning in from across the prairies. So we've got Alberta and Saskatchewan. Alberta has quite a few different places. There's Volunteer Alberta that you can start with, and then locally there's lots of different volunteer chapters. Saskatchewan doesn't have an official volunteer center, but they have the highest rate of volunteerism in Canada, so congratulations there. If anybody on the call is from Saskatchewan, Manitoba's number 2, so that's okay. But yeah, you can contact Volunteer Manitoba and we're happy to help. How can we do that? Well, you can post your volunteer positions on our website for free at any time, and you can leave them up there until they're filled. We will not put a time, well, we will sort of remind you if you leave it there for longer than 6 months and nothing's happened, but you can keep it up longer if you need it to. We reach over 6,000 people a month in our volunteer referral section of our website. There are a lot of people who just look for things to do, right? Something different, something that I can do. I've been working from home for 2 years, so to get out of the house right now, it'd be like, wow, sign me up. Although I don't know a lot about rugby, so maybe don't. Maybe wait. So yeah, you can go to our website. By registering your organization, all you have to do is click register your organization, and it'll walk you through how to do that. It's really easy. You fill it out, you name a contact person, you choose your own user ID and password, and I think it takes about 30 seconds and you're in. And then once you're in, you have an account with us. And your account remains active unless I delete it. And the only way I'm going to delete it is if something fishy is going on, but I don't think any of you are going to do anything fishy on my website, so you should be okay. But yeah, you can leave your postings up. The good thing about our site that I really like, and this works well for organizations, is If you create the account and you post a bunch of positions and they get filled, you don't necessarily delete the job ad, it'll stay there. It'll just be on the back end, so you can reopen it when you're ready to recruit again. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time. You can just go in and re-engage. And that works really well for organizations if they have turnover in their staff or their committee, because the account remains the organization's. It doesn't go with the person. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And all of this is free, including assistance by me if you need it, depending on how much assistance. Otherwise we might have to charge you, but that's okay. We can work something out. So that is my quick spiel on recruitment. And I think I'm still good for time. Yep. Okay. So now we're going to talk really quickly about volunteer needs and interests. And we're going to look at what people are looking for in a volunteer role and what motivates them to get involved. So I'm going to just start by saying that these statistics were compiled about a year and a bit, a year and 9 months-ish before the pandemic hit. There has been a lot of data collected over the pandemic and how people have shifted volunteering during the pandemic and so on. That has changed so often over the last 2 years that I didn't want to really throw all that at you in this presentation. I also think it's going to change again in the next 6 months. So I'm going with sort of the broad overview of what never changed during the pandemic, where people volunteered and how might have, but the core reasons for volunteering and time and all of that, I think have remained the same based on all the information I've seen. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So when it comes to volunteerism in Canada, we know that in general, people lead very structured lives, right? Every slot in your day is scheduled for something, you know, and me time is something. So we can't discount that, right? Looking after ourselves is just as important as looking after others. Almost every hour is spoken for or planned out or committed to somebody or something else. And we have lots of responsibilities and lots of interests as well. People want to see the results before they make a commitment. So if you're a strong organization with a good reputation, you're going to attract a lot of volunteers. If, again, you don't have a lot of information on our website, if it's not clear what people are giving their time for, you know, if people feel like you've got a reputation in our community of never delivering, like you're all talk, you talk the talk, but you don't walk the walk, you won't see as many people interested in volunteering. Technology. I have a note here, has proven very useful. Yes, it has proven very useful in the last, I'd say 10 years for sure. And it just keeps growing and growing and growing. So if you are not using technology to engage volunteers, even things like WhatsApp groups for your volunteer team to communicate, texting, having your own social media a group page for your volunteers, those things are all really handy and useful. Everybody communicates differently and everybody's comfortable with different ways of communicating. Like some people love cell phones, some people still love desktop computers. It's all very complex, I guess, is where I'm going. So technology is really important, and engaging volunteers in different ways using technology is really, it'll prove very useful for you. Also, the kind of volunteer position that someone is interested in is going to change throughout the course of their life cycle. That's pretty self-explanatory. I think what I wanted to do at 14 is definitely not what I want to do now at 46. So it's a little different. Also, my knees aren't quite as strong as they used to be when I was 14, but that's different. Also, people bring their personal talents, their professional skills, and their background and knowledge to their volunteer roles. And that's something that we need to know when we're engaging volunteers, because if we understand that, we can appeal to them more. And again, broken record, once again, people are looking for the value and the impact of their time. If I'm giving you this donation, I want to know where it's going. You know, it's the same reason why people give to charity. They want to know the money's going to a good cause, right? People want to know their time is going to a good cause and that they're making a difference. So how can we make the volunteer experience positive for people? Well, We can build meaningful relationships and get to know our volunteers so we understand why they chose to volunteer for us, what is motivating them to stay, how can we appeal and make the work interesting so that they don't leave, those types of things. We can treat them like essential members of the team and like, you know, co-workers and equal staff. They're not just volunteers. In fact, I would put them higher than staff, but that's just my own personal philosophy, part of my work. You want to remember to be flexible and accommodating as well. Obviously, you're going to manage people. That's part of your role, and other volunteers expect that of you, but you don't want to be so, you know, you're punching in your clock and punching out your clock. You want to have a little bit of flexibility and accommodate people. Life comes up, right? Things happen. Your daughter does a water sliding adventure and you have to go deal with that. Like, stuff comes up all the time. And the more flexible and accommodating we are, the more we create an experience that connects us to our volunteers, and then they're going to want to stick around. Broken record again, use technology. You want to also outline the purpose and the impact. And then finally, finally, I'm going to say it, it's not on my slide. You want to tell volunteers what you need and when you need it, but not how and when to do it. Right? So it's a very delicate ballet we play sometimes with our volunteers so that they know they're appreciated and their time is a gift, but that they don't take full advantage and run right over everything you've established in your programming. So now we're going to talk about some common volunteer demographics. The most engaged demographics are the ones that we have the most information on, I should probably say, the most research and data, are newcomers, youth, and adults. Older adults, I should say, not all adults, because that's too big of a demographic. Older adults is also a really big demographic. It's important to understand the interests and motivations of each of these groups in order to create positions that appeal to them and recruit to different groups so that you get a wide variety of volunteer talents sitting around the table. So we'll talk about young people first. Obviously, youth volunteers are really important to us because they are the future of volunteering, and every generation has had its own sort of mark it's made on volunteerism. Probably the biggest impact a generation has had is we call them the Great Generation, the parents of the boomers who went to war, and after World War II, they came back and they established the nonprofit and charitable sector. Right? The Red Cross, the YMCA, all these places were established right after World War II when people came back home and went, well, now we need to have these systems in place to help people. We need to take care of the people at home because we just fought to make sure they were okay. So every generation we try and build back on that. You know, I mean, my grandparents were hardcore public servants, and that's just what you did. So we try and engage young people these days to sort of get them motivated and excited about volunteering. And it's a little different, you know. But again, technology is a big one here. I think when it comes to young people, the one thing that I'm always telling people in my workshops is you have to remember with youth, we talk about youth in our sector and nonprofits and, you know, government funding and all of that as 15 to 30. Well, 15 to 30 is probably, I'd say, about 4 different groups within that youth category, right? You've got high school, you've got pre-high school, junior high, middle school, high school, post-secondary, and then young adults. So you've got a lot of different motivations and interests there. And what appeals to a high school student might not appeal to a 27-year-old. So you have to be aware that it's not one size fits all, which I'm sure you're all aware of that already. Youth are very energetic and enthusiastic, and they want to be constantly, you know, what's the word I'm thinking about? Energized. They want to be constantly like interested in what it is they're doing. They're very technologically savvy. And one of the things I always tell people is if you really want to engage young adults post-secondary, get them to come and build all your platforms, your technology, have them set up your website, have them set up your social media, have them figure all this stuff out for you and show you how to do it and teach everybody else how to do it. And then you're good to go, hopefully, till the new system arrives and you have to learn something new all over again. Young volunteers like to volunteer together. They like working with their peers. And they're very sensitive to perceived age discrimination And I hear that a lot actually when I work with volunteer programs. Oh, they're just kids. Oh, they're just young people. They don't know anything. Oh, when I was your age, I even do it myself. I know it's part of just getting older. You end up doing it, you don't realize it, but they're aware of it. So you just want to keep an eye on things like that. The other thing to note though is when it comes to youth volunteers, and even mostly in high school, but they can access the mandatory credits for volunteer service, and that often volunteer hours give them a credit in high school. And when it comes to post-secondary, volunteer hours lead to scholarships. So these are all really important motivators for young people. And then the other big thing they're looking for is how can volunteering help them position themselves for their future careers? And one of the biggest things that I think youth learn from volunteer work is how to apply for a job. If you have a job description and an interview process and you're managing people effectively, and you've created an HR function within your volunteer program, that's showing young people in a softer, safer environment in some ways, how to go about becoming professional, right? And learning how work environments, what's expected of you when you're in a workplace, that sort of thing. So it's different from school. And I think there's some really valuable skills that youth learn from volunteering that they'll take with them for the rest of their life. And also when you give them that impact, when you make that difference, I can't tell you how many people, when I teach workshops, talk about the first time they ever volunteered. They still remember, right? Because it was such a great experience for them. So that's enough about youth volunteers. Now we'll move on to older adults. Older adults, we used to say seniors, but we don't say seniors anymore because older adults are 55 to whenever, and I know a lot of 55 to 70-year-olds that would kill me if I called them seniors. So we're with older adults now, that's what we say. Older adults have the highest number of hours as a group. Funny enough though, young people volunteer more than any other age group. So more young people volunteer, but more older adults give more hours. That's how that math works. Took me a while to figure that out in my head. Often they will also volunteer for more than one organization. I've seen this myself being a manager of volunteers over the summer for festivals, is older volunteers will volunteer for all of the big festivals, and they'll just go weekend to weekend all throughout the city of Winnipeg or the province of Manitoba. So you just want to be careful that you don't burn them out, and also that you don't dump all the work on them because they have all this experience and knowledge and life awareness, right? Older adults want organizations to allow them to work independently and have a sense of ownership, but again, not dump everything on them and walk away and say, great, I have free staff now. They want projects where, again, they can see the impact of their time. And they want activities that offer a chance for them to do something that they didn't do for a living before they retired. And this is a big one. My father-in-law is always talking about how he was a finance guy, worked for a big bank, retired as like senior VP, blah, blah, blah. He's like, if one more person asks me to be the finance guy on their board, I am going. And I'm like, no, he wants to be like a woodworker. You know what I mean? He wants to work with animals. He did that his whole life. He doesn't want to do that anymore. We have to remember that with older adults, because oh, you're a lawyer? Come sit on my board. I need a lawyer. It's like, I did that my whole life. I don't want to do that. So you have to be careful with older adults. They want casual short-term opportunities where they can kind of test you out first and see if you know your stuff and you've got it together before they make a long-term commitment as well. And then finally, newcomer volunteers. Newcomers are very enthusiastic and very excited. They want to contribute to their new home, their new community. They want to be part of where they have settled. And I think that's really important that we meet that need as well. Volunteering is a great way for them to improve their language skills and learn about a new community and where they can go to meet new people and access services and things like that. Some of the ways that you can improve the volunteer experience for newcomers or offer opportunities for newcomers is if you look at your job position, a lot of people will be like, well, if they don't speak English, this is going to be a challenge. But have you really looked at the work that needs to be done and whether or not that level of English is required, or is it something that you can be flexible and accommodate around, right? You also want to look at matching a newcomer volunteer. And newcomer, we're talking like they've been in Canada 2 to 3 years, not somebody who's been here for 10 to 15, right? Matching them with an experienced volunteer and having that one-on-one side-by-side sort of a buddy system works really well as well. Just provides a little bit of confidence and a safety net so they don't feel overwhelmed. And then creating a bridge for them to participate in more leadership opportunities is also important. I hate to say it, but it still happens. We tend to put newcomer volunteers in the basic roles that don't need to be filled with complex, you know, sort of like tasks and things like that. And I don't think that's necessarily fair. I think you have to really look at what a person brings to the table, what their skills and their knowledge base is, what their background is, no matter where they came from, and then see, does that fit into my organization? And can I make a role that's going to work with that? Because I think we all benefit when we go broadly and we learn more about each other. So to wrap up recruitment, my pixelated Jean Picard, sorry about that. To market a volunteer position, a critical piece is understanding what a person's needs and interests are, and then making them aware of how your volunteer position will fill these needs and interests, and understanding what appeals to a broad range of groups, and being familiar with how to use those marketing basics in your recruitment of volunteers. All of this is going to work out in your favor. And if not, you can get your money back. Just kidding. And finally, the last 2 R's. I think we're good. I'll try and do this in 10 more. Well, we started a little bit late. So the last 2 R's are retention and recognition. After spending all this time designing jobs and roles and making sure the right person's been recruited, and then training them and supervising them and supporting them, screening them, all that fun stuff that goes into volunteer management and volunteer engagement, we want to make sure that they stay with us because we did all that work. So what would be the point if they left after a month, right? Over 80% of all nonprofits rely completely on volunteers to fill key roles within their organization. So how do we all make them stick around? I think that first, providing them with a solid volunteer program, designing those roles around specific tasks, and not just I have a time slot to fill and I need a body and here to do it. Being very clear about the expectations of the job and not wasting people's time, right? All of that will help you retain your volunteers. Monitoring their involvement, making sure that you're supporting and supervising, correcting anything, right? You know, nipping things in the bud if anything comes up. Do they know who they can go to for questions? Do they know how to reach you during their shift, outside of their shift, if it's an emergency, all of that fun stuff? You know, have they been trained properly? Are you getting feedback, right? Are you checking in with them after all this is said and done and you're good to go? You have to remember to go back and check on it. And then finally, recognizing their contributions, tying your recognition back to the impact of the role, and making sure that people know that their time made a difference, because that's really what everybody wants to see. So connection is also a big part of retention, and volunteers who feel a positive sense of connection with both the staff and other volunteers of the organization will tend to feel very good about the experience, and they will stick around, and they will stick around for a long time. So some of the ways that you can stay connected to your volunteers, you can create a special newsletter or an e-bulletin for them. You can provide additional training, ongoing training, opportunities for training, professional development opportunities, you know, ways to attend conferences, just anything like that is really good. And also making a personal connection, getting to know them. You know, something as simple as learning everyone's name. I don't know how challenging that is for all of you. I don't know the size of all of your individual volunteer teams, but learning people's names is really important. I can't believe how much good karma I get when I learn people's names, right? So all of this is going to reinforce that your volunteers are valuable members of your team and you can't get this work done without them. And then the final R is recognizing them for their work. We can't forget to recognize volunteers, and I think a lot of us spend a lot of time overthinking recognition. It doesn't have to be a big formal banquet once a year or anything like that. In fact, in 2017, Volunteer Canada did a survey, sorry, a report, including a survey on recognizing volunteers. And the study showed that 80% of organizations listed that the most common barrier they had to recognizing their volunteers was budget. They don't have the budget to do it. They don't have any budget line at all for anything. They're scraping by finding pizza money from wherever, getting a sponsor to do t-shirts, that kind of thing. 50% of organizations said they just don't have the time to devote to recognizing volunteers. And 40% said that their volunteers just aren't interested in a recognition event. So why are they bothering? Well, when they went and asked volunteers what they expect to be recognized for, 80% of them said they just want to know they made a difference. They don't really need to know more than that. They just want to be thanked on an ongoing, informal basis. Something as simple as, you know, hey, Peter, I'm picking on you because you're right there on my screen. But hey, Peter, you know, I just saw how you helped that person. I just think you're the cat's pajamas and I don't even know how I do this without you. Done. 20 seconds, right? And Peter's happy and he's never leaving. The other thing that most notably came from that survey, or that data report, I should say, is that volunteers stated that their least favorite way of being recognized are these big informal, or sorry, these big formal banquets or dinners, or they would rather you keep the money and put that money back into programs and services at your organization, because that's why they came there in the first place. And that's probably why there's a lack of interest on the other end from volunteers for those programs that are looking at those big events to celebrate volunteers. You can leave the big awards events to people like me at Volunteer Centers and Volunteer Canada. Let us handle all the trophies. You guys just go ahead and say thank you. All right. So with that, just one little hiccup where I lost my voice and then we came to the end. I squeezed it all in an hour. Yes, right on time, 2 minutes left. Are there any questions? I know this is a lot of information. Here, I'll stop sharing so you can see everybody.
I just wanted to say thank you very much. I think everyone on tonight has volunteered at some point in their life, because in our side, our rugby community, rugby really is about volunteerism. So that's a trademark. But for me, with volunteering with a number of different organizations over the years, I know that we can go a long way to having structure that you've explained to us, because as myself being a volunteer over the years with, you know, going for my interview at the hospital to go do Reiki on a platform, or go to the hospital and prove that I have my Serving It Better bar license so I can serve seniors alcohol once a month, right? Like having simple things like that.
Yeah.
In retrospect, helps me reevaluate how we go about finding volunteers, whether it be coaches, sideline help, putting up flags, whatever it is that in itself. So thank you, Dawn.
Oh, no problem. I'm glad I could help. I know it's a big subject, so there's a lot. I mean, we could spend a whole day just on recruitment, or a whole day just on retention, or my favorite, a whole day on criminal record checks. Any other questions? Everybody's muted. Everybody's good. Nice. My work here is done.
I have one more, because I'm going to kind of, because I think we're all kind of feeling this way too, is with the whole due diligence part of the criminal record check, for instances, what is a streamlined way that we can add that in, because we do need that on all of our levels here in rugby, and we do need to start incorporating that, not just on our coaching level, but all of them. Right. But how do we go about doing that if we either, one, don't have a budget to reimburse people for getting their criminal record check, and or a way of finding a way of how to reimburse them for doing that for us, right? Because that is that's part of the price, right? Part of the 5 Ps.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a good point. The price part is, unfortunately, there's not sort of a broad answer that applies to everybody, because we are all at the mercy of our local law enforcement agency. So if you live in the city of Winnipeg, for example, you have to get your criminal record check through WPS. and they will not waive the fee for volunteers. We've tried in the past. I don't know how long ago it was, but it's sort of been a bit of a roadblock, and it's like that in other parts of Canada as well. It just depends on the law enforcement agency. If you live outside of the city of Winnipeg, you go to your local RCMP detachment, they won't charge you anything. They will just require, some of them will require a letter from the organization, just, yes, this is in fact Patrick and he will be volunteering for me and I vouch for that and here's my contact info, and then they just give you your record check. There's a lot to unpack when it comes to criminal record checks. They're not the only egg in the basket. There's a whole 10 steps of screening that's really been developed for volunteers and volunteer programs here in Canada. Volunteer Canada and Public Safety Canada work together on this resource. It's available on our website for free, for sure, that I know. You can download it. And for those of you who don't live in Winnipeg or Manitoba, there's sections for each province in there. So the law in Saskatchewan is going to be different, and how Saskatchewan law enforcement gathers information and keeps records on people is slightly different than it is in Manitoba, which is slightly, and then local versus provincial versus federal. Like there's lots of databases, there's lots of information kind of floating around. I would recommend, before you look at any kind of screening program or looking at overhauling your screening program, reading through the screening handbook. It's on our website under resources. There's a volunteer management section. We can also, I can tell Camila to follow up with the link to Patrick to make it simple, because I think she'll send you something tomorrow probably for, I'm not sure what she does. She's training and I'm communications. So she does she comes in after and cleans up after me. But I can make sure she also includes that link, and then you can share it to make it easy. But if you don't want to wait, go to volunteermanitoba.ca and look under our resources section. I would look through that. It's pretty, like they've created it so that anybody can access it and follow it. And then that gives you sort of a starting point on what you have to evaluate and how you want to assess your own screening process. And then I would reach out. I mean, like every law enforcement agency that I've worked with or spoken to or had any interaction with, they're more than happy to help when it comes to volunteers, right? And they're more than happy to clarify or let you know why we're doing this or why we don't reimburse this charge, that sort of thing. I wish I could tell you this fund will give you the money to make sure that but it just doesn't exist that I know of in Manitoba right now. It's possible that it exists, and I think in Alberta then nobody pays. Is anybody here from Alberta? Peter, my man Peter, do you pay for criminal record checks? Doesn't Volunteer Alberta cover the cost or something?
It's exactly like you said. The RCMP outside of cities will do it with a volunteer letter, but then in Edmonton and Calgary, you need to go to their main unit to get it done for $50 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You can sign up, like the Saints signed up for something where they can do it for free. I don't know how they did it, but they did. So there's some way, a free way that you say you're not for profit.
There
or something.
might be. That's a good point. There could be, because you're all in sports and working with young kids, you might fall into a special sort of waiver category from your local enforcement. You'd have to look into that yourself, because I don't know of any general kind of broad that would cover everybody. But I know, I mean, we're all aware if something makes the news, then for years after, they're going to up the ante on the screening and stuff. But I would reach out. I also know if you go to the province of Manitoba to get the child abuse or the adult abuse check, those can be reimbursed by the province if you're a nonprofit organization or a charity. They'll waive that fee for you. Or I don't know how the reimbursement works, but I know that that's only a $10 charge. So the police check's the big one. It's $50, $55 if you get the vulnerable one too, right? Or it is in Winnipeg. It's the number one thing. I get this question about 4 or 5 times a month. How do I get this without having to pay $55? And unfortunately, it's like move to Selkirk or wherever. Yeah, it's just, I mean, I'd love to get, I can say that Volunteer Canada has been, and actually, Patrick, you're in Australia right now, aren't you?
That's correct.
Okay, Australia has a system that I think we should all copy. I'm not super familiar, so I might get this wrong, but there's a card, a blue card or some kind of card that you get. So anyone, whether you're in healthcare, education, volunteering, sport, whatever it is, all your records are tied to this card, and the government keeps it updated, and all you do is swipe. And so, or I don't know if you actually swipe, but that's what I was told.
Yeah,
and then they'll tell you if you have a flag, and then you can find out the flag. But they just say you're clear or you're not. And if you're not, then you go to the next step. But everyone has this card and no one pays for it. So Canada's trying to do the same thing here, which means it'll probably take a while, but you're familiar with that, Patrick?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. You just sort of present it on arrival and they can scan it if there's extra sort of things that you have to do. It's like coaches, teachers, teaching assistants.
Everything, yeah. Yeah, so Canada, Volunteer Canada is trying to get our government to look at doing that for across Canada. So you know that'll take a while. But, and then the pandemic hit. So unfortunately, a lot of these sort of, all the progress that we were making right before the pandemic has gone back a few steps. But I'm hopeful that in maybe not too long, we'll have our own little card. Because wouldn't that be easy on all of us to just swipe a card and know if somebody's got a flag or not, right? So.
It would certainly save a lot of headaches from, I know, Pete, myself and Jordan's perspectives. So that's fantastic. And thanks again very much, Dawn.
Oh, you're welcome.
As I said, I'll be reaching out to Camilla and to probably yourself as well to follow up and just sort of say thank you and
yeah, absolutely.
But we'll also look to in partnership with Sport Manitoba to subsidize some of the training courses. So please, anyone that's watching this in posterity or on the call tonight, if you do want to do some more formalized deeper dive training, please contact your provincial representative and we'll set something up probably in the next month. I'm basically kind of at the point where I think it's anyone that's on a board should definitely consider something like this because it's extremely valuable work. So thanks very much, Dawn. And
you're welcome.
A lot of content in a very little time. And
I only lost my voice once, so that's good. Thanks, everyone. Have a lovely evening. Don't stay out too late.
Perfect. Thank you, Dawn.
Bye.
Perfect. So yeah, we'll move on. Our next presenter here is ready and waiting to go. Maybe familiar to some. If you know him, he's probably because he was the coach to the Cyprus rugby team for a while. He was a development officer all over, what it looks like all over the home nations in England and Ireland, and then obviously did a stint with a bunch of clubs out in BC. As just a vacation, I think, for himself. So without further ado, Phil Llewellyn's here to give us some coaching support tips and whatnot.
Very kind, Pete. Thank you. Yeah, great to meet everyone. I think my kind of presentation window is a fair bit shorter than Dawn's, so we'll kind of crack straight into it. And I think the big thing for me is really to just get you guys kind of talking and discussing. I didn't want to spend this time going through information that wasn't going to be useful. So if I can share my screen, which I think I can, there we go. Very simply, we will jump straight to, so really just looking at how we can actually kind of support coaches to be successful. So my first question to all of you is actually like, what are the challenges you currently face, right? Because this, I think is just far easier for us to kind of recognize what some of those challenges are. And then hopefully kind of find some practical solutions. I've done some slides that I've sent to Pete that can be kind of shared around with some thoughts and some ideas, and more than happy to kind of follow this up individually if people want to kind of chat further. But actually, really trying to use this session as a practical tool to get some answers for you guys and get some discussion. So in terms of what are the challenges you guys face around developing, creating, sustaining successful coaches, and I guess the more in a holistic sense rather than just like how do we get teams to win more. because if I knew that, I would have probably retired a long time ago, right? So I think it's probably more around the general nature of club work and that type of stuff. So if anything springs to mind, please do unmute and dive on in straight away.
Maybe one of the things is just the lack of understanding of the game of rugby by our general public. Means you're always trying to convince people that it's a real game and it's safe and it's better than soccer or hockey or football or basketball or anything that's much more established.
Love that. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so lack of understanding and kind of competition with other sports. That's a great one. Awesome. What I think we'll do, if guys are happy, we'll kind of, if we share all of the issues and then maybe we'll kind of circle back and discuss them and find some solutions. I think that could be our best way forward. So that's a great start. Thank you very much, Guy. Appreciate that. Anyone else? What else are we kind of thinking are issues your coaches face or you face?
I think for some people it's confidence. They might know the game really well, but they don't necessarily have the confidence if they can teach somebody else.
Okay, great, thank you. So confidence of coaches. So would you say actual confidence in the process of coaching rather than the game itself?
Exactly. Like they can go out and play it like a rock star,
Yeah.
but then they, hesitant about being in that type of leadership role.
Makes sense. Yeah, great stuff. Thank you. That's a really good one. Someone else was going to jump in at that point, I think, as well.
Yeah, I was going to jump in. I just I realized I didn't have my sentence put together. So somebody else has it. I'm just going to get my thoughts. It's been a long couple of days in schools with kids, doing some coaching of my own. So I just need a second.
Nice, no problem.
Yeah, Phil, I'd probably put a challenge in here is just having appropriate competitions available for people trying to get involved. As Guy was speaking about, we have a lot in, I mean, you've experienced it out in BC where it's probably a little lesser of a problem, but we need sort of appropriate competitions for people to sort of get into the sport and then excel at the sport as well. So that's a challenge here, is we're often selling the idea of a competition rather than something that already exists. And then staffing those programs is the secondary on that.
Okay, so appropriate level of competition as an entry point. What was the second part of that, Patrick? Sorry.
Just how, I guess it's not just selling it to the players, it's selling it to the coaches as well, because we obviously have to staff these programs as well. So that's sort of the coaching spin. Okay.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
I think I got it. So it's kind of two parts with the same sort of problem. One, with coaches and clubs getting the right equipment that the coaches need to properly train the athletes. Not just talking balls and cones and stuff, but the bigger pieces, scrum machines, some of the more technical pieces out there. And then also making sure that the coach's time is being used effectively from the perspective of having enough players at training sessions, having players ready, focused, setting standards and expectations of what's going to go on in the training session, how people should be conducting themselves. So again, so the coach's time is used effectively.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so kind of correct equipment and then effective use of coach's time. Great stuff. Cool. Any more?
I'll add something in for kind of like the younger, when you get back into the high schools and such, the level 1 coaches. That's something here in Manitoba we've discussed a bit, is finding ways to either reimburse or help budget I'm going to say kids, I'm going to say youth or young adults, so that they can become coaches. A lot of people who have interest in coaching may not have the finances here to do it. So being able to somehow promote somehow of how their financial resources will help them in return, right? It's like trying to sell that piece to them, because there's that interest, but there's that financial backing that seems to be a flag for a lot of people.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. So kind of, yeah, around cost reimbursement, how do you sell the qualification? That's a great one. Cool. Any others? Silence descends. Cool. I mean, that's a decent list of 6. So what I'm going to do is stop that share, because we can always come back to that. So great stuff. Oh yeah, if we'll jump in, I mean, does anybody have any great solutions? I'm literally just facilitating there. Like I'm certainly not an oracle with all the answers, but did anything spring to anybody's mind in terms of some solutions to the other people's challenges that they may want to share?
One thing that I could say to Elizabeth's concern around funding, like our club reimburses courses or reimburses coaches registration, and we find we get it back in spades. That even though we paid, you know, $200 for a course, we would get 200 more in registration from parents registering their children, because our coaches are all certified and we have more coaches, kind of thing.
I think that's a great one. Just run me by, do all of your coaches have to be certified to be able to coach? Like to be on the grass with someone to deliver? Do they have some people are nodding, some are shaking their head. Okay, so
Not in Saskatchewan.
Okay, I mean, that's useful to know. I think that's probably something to be, I appreciate you guys will be clear on that, but I think for them to be clear on that is probably quite useful.
In Manitoba, we're working hard for everyone for several years now to get anyone who's coaching tackle rugby has minimum level 1.
Okay.
Anyone who's coaching flag or youth, no, they just take their rookie rugby or whichever things are being offered to them. But that's something part of the due diligence clause, right? With working with kids, youth, and or just having that due diligence and an insurance standpoint, and showing that we know our stuff, right? That we have structure and composure for the greater public, that yes, this is what we have to offer. This is where your money's going. So that is something that's in our strategic plan to implement here in Manitoba.
I love that. I mean, my mind sprung straight to actually, you know, the model that we tend to see, I would say globally, is you have the same coaches with the same group that work all the way through, right? So that whether it's parents or whatever, some of the best models I've seen they are somewhat specialist coaches within junior club rugby. So I might be a tackle coach. So actually I'm going to spend a lot of my time jumping around different age groups and different stages, because my experience and not necessarily my qualification, but my experience and my expertise as a coach is in being able to coach a really effective and safe tackle or the contact area or something like that. Some coaches that maybe don't hold that qualification may do the skills, they may do catch and pass, because they can do that with any group. So it's not, I love the ambition to say we absolutely want everybody qualified, and I 100% on board with that. I think the interim may be actually, well, can you retask some of the qualified individuals to work with some of those age groups that maybe don't have qualified coaches, rather than everybody just staying together. As I say, that's a little bit of a sell. That's a little bit of a different shape of how the model works and how a Saturday or Sunday morning session might look for clubs. But I actually think if you can, there's a huge opportunity, I would say, for kind of peer-to-peer sharing there, actually a little bit of mentoring around, I'm going to come in and work with you guys as a Sunday morning group, and you're going to learn about how I deliver the contact area and the tackle, and then when you come to my age group and do catch and pass, I'm going to pick up stuff from them. So I think really kind of a little bit of a skills audit maybe amongst your coaching group of who is the best coach we have at X and Y and Z, who might want to lead some of that stuff, who might want to take a responsibility for going out and even leading the CPD for them and the club on that area, and then they can kind of trickle that down as that kind of waterfall cascade effect of, I don't have to go out and learn everything about everything. Like that's we know that's an impossible task. We know there's a time challenge and all of this type of stuff. I think just being able to say to Pete, right, Pete, you know, can you deliver a session next month on kicking? Great, because Pete's got some experience in that, and he's gone and found some new information, and he shared that. I think there's ways to develop those kind of communities of practice that are really probably quite informal, and also just starts to mix that up a little bit, as Dawn said, actually create some connection amongst coaches and sharing ideas and all those types of things. So I guess that's definitely one idea for that. I think the other one around selling the qualification, as you said, is just the better experience. Ultimately, we are service providers, right? Like, we can't get away from that, whether we look at rugby as a business or not. I think the fact we kind of have to land back on that, the better the quality, the delivery, the better the experience for the kids, the more kids are going to come, the more they enjoy that, the more the parents are engaged. The whole thing comes from actually what is the lived experience of the individuals that walk through that kind of door or walk onto the pitch every week. So I think certainly there is an element of investment, but actually if you're coming in and I'm saying, okay, it might cost you $200 to complete this qualification, like, we can't give you that money back, but what we can do is hook you up with 5 or 6 other people that are going to make you better. We might be able to, you know, put you in with a mentor, somebody that has been coaching for a while to kind of help develop your coaching experience and your coaching expertise. And that might not be jumping into, you know, the second one, the confidence of the coaches in the coaching process. Like, we don't have to always talk about the sport. Our coaches having those conversations around the coaching process and the nature of coaching, rather than, you know, how do I, you know, what does a 1-3-3-1 formation look like, or what does a scrum shape look like, or whatever that might be. Like, actually, are we talking about how we connect with people and how we use different planning methods and different delivery styles and all those types of things. So I definitely think that pulling all of that together might start to cover a couple of those issues.
My experience in Manitoba mostly has been that the problem is that the coaching certification program has never really been structurally enforced. It's had administrative problems from people who've taken courses and they don't get their certifications because there's issues with getting certifications. And because you can coach without having certification, you have a bunch of people who are coaching who aren't certified. That doesn't mean that they're not good coaches. Or that they don't know what they're doing. It's just they're not certified. And you've got to have a very strong and strict structure to get that in place. And one of the issues you then have is you have to basically identify the people that are coaching and then work on them individually. That I've never, like, there was a nice program, the nice lady talked about volunteers. Well, I've never really recruited volunteers by putting an ad in the paper. I recruited volunteers from talking to people who I thought might volunteer, and that's how I got my volunteers. Similarly with coaches, it's got to be, as far as I'm concerned, a more hands-on approach. And club coaches, like I remember some clubs that had 3 teams and they had 1 coach. And that's a heck of a burden, putting on 1 guy to coach 3 teams. And you've got to basically build it up. And I don't think it at its present level, it's in that good shape. Doesn't mean it shouldn't be, doesn't mean it couldn't be, but I don't think it is.
Fair. Yeah, I think good points. I mean, I can't speak to the quality of the kind of the qualification, I guess, but I definitely agree with you in terms of how you go about recruiting those people, and even, you know, just identifying traditionally where have they come from. You know, I would guess, if from my experience in BC, or as limited as it was, there's still a lot of parents that make that step into coaching and then follow their kind of son or daughter's team all the way through. And I guess that kind of jumps back to the first challenge around maybe a lack of understanding of the sport or the kind of competition with other sports. And my question would be, actually, what kind of information are you guys providing volunteers that are about to get into coaching, or what information are you providing new parents that maybe don't understand the game? I mean, is it literally like a beginner's guide to rugby, idiot's guide, if you want another term? It's one of those really kind of simple, might be a laminated little sheet or something like that gives some pointers, that gives some good resources. Maybe it's a QR code, that links to the World Rugby introduction website or something. I mean, I would say there are a lot of very good resources available. I don't think it's about you guys having to create those resources, but can you direct people to those resources really quickly and really easily? So actually the parents or the grandparents or whoever it is that might be kind of bringing these kids along or getting involved for the first time, and even the kids themselves, like how do we direct them to start to understand a little bit more about the game and the rules, laws, even the techniques, whatever it might be? Can you kind of package that in a way that say, oh, you're new, fantastic, here's a sheet, this might just help you out and enable this to all make a little bit more sense. So yeah, I mean, you guys give me a brief rundown. Like what does that look like for somebody that's new walking into your club that's never really experienced rugby?
Phil, I think that's a fantastic idea, that resource. That's definitely piqued my interest, as but I'm just looking for, like, is there an example that you could sort of see as like or that you've got as like what's a best sort of, like, what's a really good example of that you could see? Because absolutely, like,
show us your resource package, Phil. Show us the package. Send us the
I'll be honest, I've not seen that. I mean, I know of, there's a guy on Instagram, Sam Lama, they just calls them kind of whiteboard rugby sessions. So there's some really good resources. They are designed for beginners, and I can send Pete all the links to send out to you guys. We did one, I coach Oxford University women, university students, but most of the players are brand new to rugby. I just did a really simple Word document, and I just put in some hyperlinks to his stuff. I put in some hyperlinks to the World Rugby stuff, and again, I can send the links on. I've not seen it in a kind of a shiny, jazzed up kind of way that is given to parents, but I do think there is some stuff there that's certainly designed for new people to rugby, just to get them up to speed a little bit quicker. So I mean, if you guys want to run with that, like, please do, please tell me, please send it through. I'd love to see that, because I do feel like we're probably missing a trick if we aren't doing that in a way that's really quite marketable. And as you say, I just think it's a really good identification of a huge challenge, because rugby is not easy to follow. It's not a simple game.
Sorry, did you say the guy's name was Sam Lama?
Lama, yeah, Lana, sorry, Larner. I can send you the link.
Thanks, mate. I appreciate that. That's something that sort of we've identified here as like a key thing. Following the example of Formula One, actually, they give away a lot of information for free, which gets people to buy into the sport. And that once you've bought in, once you've made that investment to understand it, you enjoy watching the game a lot more. And I think a lot of people in Canada particularly look at it and go, what? I mean, even in Australia, to be honest, people look at union and they don't know what's going on in the ruck. So that's why rugby league and American football changed the ruck rules. It's not good for spectators.
No, 100%. And it was highlighted to me, this was a few years ago, but rugby struggles because for actually quite a large proportion of the game, people can't see the ball. And if you think about most ball sports, you can just track the ball. Wherever the ball goes, you can watch the ball. But in rugby, we love, hiding it away in a scrum or a maul or bottom of a ruck or something. And people just don't follow that, which I always thought was quite an interesting take. So, but as I say, I definitely think there's a challenge there. The more we can share, the better would kind of be my best solution there, I guess, off the top of my head.
The Rugby Football Union, sorry to interrupt, doesn't the Rugby Football Union have a little guide for parents? Now, I don't think it's a graphic, and I don't think it explains the game, but I thought they had a kind of little package about registering and things like that. That's one. But I think what you're leading to, Phil, is kind of a pictorial thing so I can see what a ruck looks like. Oh, that's what a ruck is. That's what a scrum is. And you're right. The other thing too, I think a lot of North Americans struggle with is the goddamn game of rugby doesn't stop as much. There's not enough stopping and substitutions. All right. And there's, so the only stops are kicks and goals. And I think that's a challenge for many spectators too. But you're right, because we can't always see the ball. That's an interesting thought. I never thought of it that way. But yeah, good point. Thank you.
No, very well.
One of the issues that all the people I'm looking at would have had is that you could see the ball. I played and I couldn't see the ball. So I actually learned how to see where the ball would be without actually seeing the ball.
I like that. You're gonna have to let me in on your secret at the end, I think, for that.
I was mentored by a fellow, was a Welsh prop for 15 years in the first division in Wales.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
I love that. Great stuff. Cool. So other challenge, we talked about appropriate competitions, kind of level of the competition, and then selling that to the coaches. I mean, a difficult one without maybe a little bit more context, but my immediate thought, there's some pretty good research out there, and this might be for maybe some of the guys from your unions to delve into a little bit and feedback in a friendly way, because academic sports research is not necessarily easy to decipher and unless you're kind of in that field, I guess, the same as any research. So there is definitely some good stuff there around kind of the motivations of young participants, around actually why they take part in sport, and the kind of the motivations, the interest they have, the things they want back from that's definitely one. I think how competition supports growth and development, there is a huge amount on that. So England Rugby, what are we talking, probably 7 or 8 years ago, basically revamped their whole kind of junior rugby competition structure to move towards a model that was player-centered, competition supported was their wording. So it was a really sizable shift away from kids teams have to win, and that's contentious, but it was backed up by some kind of good research amongst the rugby community that said actually there are longer term dangers of that if coaches are letting kind of egos and all those types of things dominate the process. Then we're losing kids, they're not enjoying it, the quality of the experience, the negative behaviors on the touchline, all of this type of stuff was heavily impacted by just actually how determined people were to ensure that they won. The latest change in that, which came in 2 years ago, was the half game rule. So every player in a junior squad under 18 now has to be involved for at least 40 minutes in the game, or 35 for junior players, which again it came up against a lot of kind of challenges and a lot of difficulties, and it's taken a lot of hard work to kind of sell those messages. But I definitely think there is a sizable sea change in coaches and individuals' understanding of why that is, because ultimately, and whether you want to kind of look at the top down model or the bottom up, a lot of it would be we just don't know in a late development sport who will develop into what position. So how can we be making selection decisions and this type of stuff based on early maturation and those elements? And I just think that creates probably some major issues. So a little bit of kind of easy to understand information around that might help that sell, Patrick, with some of those parents, I guess. Again, there's some good resources out there. The fun map stuff is pretty good. Was based in soccer, but really kind of helps to break down how and why young people are involved in the sports they're involved in. And then I think, as you say, it's really just trying to sell the nature of the competition. What is its purpose, I guess? So actually, how is it developing the players? That would be my first question, because if you guys are clear on that, but the coaches aren't clear, then there's probably just a little bit of a miscommunication somewhere. So actually, how are you taking everybody along that journey? Yes, don't get me wrong, there's always going to be people that are are the last ones to adopt something like this, but how can you kind of create that excitement, create that kind of wave of enthusiasm for something that is kind of ultimately better for the long-term development of the athlete. So I've maybe talked around that a little bit. I don't know if I've actually kind of answered that specifically in terms of some actionable points, but hopefully that might be useful. Please tell me if it wasn't, or if it was, either way. Yeah, thumbs up, love it. So I guess we can answer 4 and 5. So correct equipment. I mean, you mentioned, I don't know if he's Andrew, I mean, you mentioned Scrum Machine. I guess I definitely think about looking at resources and things that are out there where, I mean, you know, I know what it is here, like £10,000 on a Scrum Machine is a heck of a lot of money, right? So actually, can we be doing some body weight development stuff where we're engaging and building up from 1v1, 2v2, 3v3, 5v5, 8v8? My question would kind of really be can we find some other ways where we don't need some of this really expensive equipment? Because if I'm honest, in my whole career, I've seen more Scrum Machines sat in corners of rugby training centers rotting than I ever have in use, right? So and even down to your, some of your big tackle tubes and that type of stuff. Like if you maybe ask your coaches to come up with a list of sessions of why they would want this stuff and how they would use it, and then have some conversations with some other coaches that or them and go, right, well, we haven't got it, how can we be creative in finding some new ways to do the same or slightly different practices but hit the same outcome, right? And again, I think there's a lot of information out there that would be pretty proactive in certainly from a scrummaging perspective in actually highlighting like the machine is probably the last thing you want to work on, because it doesn't replicate what you experience in a game. So I can definitely understand why people look at them and want them, and why people want an absolute ton of hit shields and a ton of big tackle tubes and that type of stuff. And I guess, as you said, if there's no funding, then I think it's about really just putting people's brains together to be creative and come up and really just replace practices. And again, whether that's online, whether that's a shared PDF, whether that's a printout or something like that, but actually sharing that amongst all your coaches. Like if our transition from kind of non-contact touch flag into tackle is kind of under 9s, and I'm always shocked when I go into clubs and you've basically had guys spend the last season developing their understanding of the tackle and coming up with all these fantastic practices, and there's never a handover file or anything that gets passed down from these coaches that have spent a year or two working with these kids on this process to the new coaches that are really quite scared, going, yeah, I'm really not sure, like we've not done this before, what does this look like? And I've never quite understood that. Like the cascade effect for me should be really, really strong within any club, where we're just saying, right, at the end of the season, like just write down some notes. What are your top tips? What are the best things you've learned? What are the things that they can make, the shortcuts you found that maybe helped, and just grow that every year. So we're not maybe wasting. And there's an element of you want to experience stuff for yourself. I get that. But if someone had given me those types of shortcuts when I was first coaching tackle rugby, I'd have been like, great, like at least I can read this and make an informed decision. So I think maybe some of that type of stuff with around your equipment use as well might not be a bad idea, just to see what you can come up with. In terms of, I think, effective use of coaches' time, we'd always want more time, right? That's always going to be a challenge, isn't it? So my perspective and my work around timing has always been, actually, timing's just about priorities. Right? And I would say this to every player that always tells me, I've not got time to practice, or I've not got time to do this. You can always make time. You can always find time. All you need to do is just readdress your priorities, and that's always been pretty clear. So and there's other positions to take, and I'm not saying mine is right. It probably isn't, but I definitely think there's an element there of clarity around what are your coaching priorities. Are your junior section, adult section, whoever it is the coaches are working with, like, are they really clear on what they need to be prioritizing their time on? has that been discussed amongst the coaching group, amongst the club? Has that been agreed? Has that been, how have we engaged the players in those discussions? How are we managing player feedback into that? From my perspective, the coach isn't they're not the Wizard of Oz, right? Like, they're not the all singing, all dancing oracle sat at the end with all the answers. They're just part of the process, and the players and the parents and the other people involved in your clubs, I think, have a huge role to play within creating an informed understanding. Do we want to take people with us on that journey? We want to be offering a really good product at the end of the day. So actually just spending a little bit of time on understanding what the stakeholders want. That's going to vary team to team, isn't it? Absolutely. Like, you might have some teams that are far more invested in wanting to play more games and wanting to win. You might have some teams that are going to be far more invested in just wanting to get better and wanting to develop. So your coaching is going to have to reflect that. And I think it's then probably on the skill of the coach. And it might come back to that mentoring piece, actually, who is a fairly effective planner, who's been through that before, maybe, who's got some top tips that they can share with some of the maybe slightly more inexperienced coaches on how they can develop these processes and systems. Again, I mean, I don't know what the qualifications look like for you guys, but that's always been something our qualifications over here have kind of covered. Planning is a fairly decent element of those qualifications. So if it isn't, then maybe that's something the rugby associations could actually just put on as another CPD. That might be a really good opportunity just to engage some coaches in a call like this and chat through how they plan that community of practice within the club. Again, just sharing that information. Are they kind of just sat down and discussing how they all go about doing it differently? I think just trying to get people in the same room to talk about, with a bit of a theme, like you can go really structured, you can go really informal. There's probably a balance somewhere in between. Maybe a bit of new information being brought in by someone being seen as a kind of expert or something like that. Lawrence, did you have a point? Jump in.
Well, one of the problems I see with coaching at schools, coaching at clubs, which isn't the same problem at coaching at the international level or coaching with a well-run provincial program, is you've got a manager for every team. And the manager looks after getting the players out. He's somebody the players can confide in. And he's somebody that basically the coach then doesn't have to do the management, because too much, the coach has enough to do just coaching. And there isn't a structure where there's a manager put in place who manages things. That works at a provincial level, and it keeps things functional. And I've seen that's something that should be brought in and made an important position. And you don't have to have anybody who's an active player, and you don't have to anybody who's a coach to do that. A manager can be one of your older guys who you can talk them into staying involved, but it's never been the structure that's been in place. That's my 2 cents.
No, love it. Great idea. Is that even something you could hand over to the players? Again, it depends on their age, a little bit of personal responsibility and development for them. Who have you got a leadership group? Is somebody in charge of managing those guys? And as you said, getting them out, getting them prepped. Are they running their own warm up? Have they got a set of skill practices that they start the session with? And your primers, your handling, your evasion, whatever that might be. Some kind of processes and structures around that might be quite useful. We used to we'd draw up a kind of a 4-week warm-up plan, and that would be shared with the players via a PDF, just so they had it digitally, and they knew what the warm-up was going to be for the next 4 weeks, every Tuesday, Thursday, for training. So they just fell in. Okay, the first week is a little bit slower, and we've got to take them through it. But after that, they're running with it themselves. So little bits like that, I just kind of think take away that necessity for the coach to have to lead the warm-up every time and have to be heavily involved and do those bits.
Well, one of the problems you have is a player may have, I've got a problem with work or with my family or this or that. I'm having my car's broken down. The coach shouldn't be having to hear from this player that he can't make it. But if there's a manager who isn't involved in playing and isn't involved in coaching, you've got somebody who handles that. and who can troubleshoot. That's what I was thinking of. And it seemed to me that would add a lot to how you structure things and also take a lot of the burden off the coaches, because the coaches are overburdened.
100%. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that admin's a big part of the role. So as you say, if you can reduce that, it's a very positive one.
Yeah,
No.
that's definitely kind of where I was going with the comment of managing and respecting the coach's time, is more on that club side of how they can take some burdens off the coaches so that it's not a 24/7 job, and they can focus really kind of on the coaching side, which is what they're signing up to do. To get back to our volunteer management presentation, so that they can keep in their section of what they actually signed up to do and not be given all of this other responsibility on top of it. So thanks, Lawrence, for that one.
Great stuff. Cool.
Just another thought on that one. Sorry to Phil, before you go. What I've used senior players to help out. All right. And, you know, I've got my 10, he's been around for 112 years, right? Give him a role, responsibility, as you've alluded to, right? Things like the warm-ups and, you know, all those kind of things, right? Where you take some of the senior players and you bring them together and you say, okay, so what do we do, guys? All right. And I think one of the things, and I've been guilty of, is anybody here probably not listening to anybody, because I know so much more than they do. Bullshit. But you know what, when you stop and do that, they come up with some really good ideas. But give some of your senior players, now that's tough in high school, unless you happen to have some kids that have played for you for a couple of years. But with clubs, you can do that. Get your senior players, and doesn't take away the beauty of having a manager, somebody who can do some of the logistics and all that, those things. But sometimes we forget about those senior players who have some really good ideas, and they're not necessarily listening for me to tell them what to do. They want the opportunity to figure something out and get involved. So just share that too.
Love it. I think, as you guys have all talked about there, it's probably just providing that opportunity, right? If people see there's an opportunity, they'll tend to step up into the hole. From my experience, I think if people feel it's a closed shop, if people feel like nobody wants help, like it's the brave thing to do, and I think you've got to be maybe somewhat strategic in how you do it. That it's an ask for help rather than the cry for help. I often feel like a cry for help can be quite distressing for people, because they just think it's almost overwhelming. If I step into this, I'm stepping into a real problem. Whereas an ask for help is oh, well, no, I mean, they've just been brave enough to ask. Like, clearly there's a need for help. Yeah, I can spare an hour, I could spare 5 hours, whatever it might be. I can get involved and help here. And I think how you guys go about creating that, and probably targeting a few people with that, I think is maybe something to spend a little bit of time considering and coming up with a plan for. But I've certainly never, or very rarely have I seen an ask for help go unanswered. Like, most people are willing in some form, and then, you know, tying back into the little bit I heard from your volunteering presentation, then it's about the job they're being asked to do and the clarity and I guess, you know, all those other kind of pieces that come together with how you retain and develop and kind of grow those volunteers. But I definitely think taking that initial step is probably quite a key one. So yeah, doing that quite softly, but it's generally does start with you've got to ask somebody, or they've got to see a hole or an opportunity somewhere first. Cool. I mean, I've spoken way more than I thought there, and I'm conscious of time already, but so much for 15 minutes, Pete. Sorry, that's just disappeared.
No, that's fantastic. I think that's what the crowd here wanted was the chance to ask the pro. So it was fantastic. Maybe any last bits for Phil, or we'll let him log off and save his pipes for probably training tomorrow and his ladies there.
Cool. No, guys, thank you very much. Some really great challenges. Hopefully, some useful responses from me. As I say, the slides, there's some other bits I've shared there. I'm happy to put other stuff together, and help. And I'm sure Pete can share my email and mobile as well. So always happy to chat and help as much as I can. So yeah, lovely to meet you all. And I'll leave you guys to the rest of it. It's pretty late here, so I'm going to head to bed.
Thanks for your time, Phil. Appreciate it.
Thanks
No,
a lot,
absolute
Phil.
pleasure. Yeah, no, great stuff. Have a good one. Look after yourselves. Bye.
Perfect. Well, I think that'll do her for tonight. We're a smaller group, but we'll be able to tell all our friends how good the video is going to be, and we get the prime spots looking good on the camera. So thanks everyone for coming, and we'll see you next week. Andrew, what's the rundown for next week again? Uno momento, he's telling me.
I just got to bring it back up. I don't have my schedule open. So come on, scroll bar. Come on. Where are we? Okay, so we've got community engagement through events, tournaments, and sponsorships and partnerships as our topics for next week. So that's really kind of under the whole revenue generation and kind of community building aspect.
All righty. Well, let's go make some money next week then.
Thanks. Hope to see you again next week.
Peter, are you from Calgary or Edmonton?
I grew up in Calgary, but I live in Edmonton now, so a bit of both.
Okay.